Welcome. So let's talk about productivity. What is it and how do we measure it? So productivity is an important and necessary measure so that we kind of get some idea of what are we getting out for how much resources we're putting in, right? So that could be production, like how many widgets are we getting out versus how many hours. It could be in cost terms. There's lots of different ways to define it. As you can see here, I'm just showing 4 different ways we can define productivity. But really, it's a measure of output over input, however you slice it. So we could look at something like total productivity. Total productivity is how many widgets were produced, right? If we're talking about products, or how many patients did we serve, whatever, if it's a service, versus over all the inputs that were used. So total productivity is if we know everything, we could put everything in the numerator and everything in the denominator and get some idea of what we're looking at. So the other thing is we could then weed out certain things and look at what we call partial productivity. And this is where we look at certain factors. And so we could look at productivity from a certain point of view. So for example, if we use labor productivity, it's partial productivity because it's the output again, so probably like number of widgets and stuff, but divided by how many hours did we put into it, right? How many labor hours did we put in it? So that way we're getting kind of a productivity measure of per person that's actually making these widgets, the people who are usually on the manufacturing line. So that's one way of looking at it. We could look at a different factor of partial productivity. We say the same thing, how many widgets did we produce? But in terms of how much money did it take, how much did we spend to produce those number of goods? And the output of that then is probably the cost per good. So how many units of goods could we make per dollar, right? So that's a different kind of measure. It gives us a little bit different picture of what's going on. Now, in lieu of not always having total productivity, what may be a little bit better is a multi-factor productivity where we add in a few things. Now, if we do this, particularly on the denominator, if we want to add labor and materials and machines or capital, whatever we want to put on the denominator, we do need to have the same units. So we have to put something in the same units that can be immeasurable. Usually it's cost associated with those things. So for example, we could have labor and materials. So that would be the cost of that labor plus the cost of the materials on the denominator. Versus in the last one, if it was labor, materials, and capital, all of those would be in currency terms. And machines could be in there as well. And these typically tend to be your variable costs. So these are several ways that we can calculate something. So let's take a look at an example. Here we've got Long Beach Bank. They employ 3 loan officers. Great, we got 3 loan officers. They each work standard 8-hour days, good. Each officer processes an average of 5 loans per day. The bank's cost for the officers is $820 per day. Now there's a little caveat here because that's not per person. The way they're defining it in this problem is it's $820 for all 3 of those loan officers, which is a little weird way to put it. Usually you don't see things delivered that way. Usually it's what is the cost per person per day. So which is most problems you would come across would be like that. Then there's also an overhead expense, a daily overhead expense. This includes things like rent, utilities, air conditioning, internet use, something that everybody's using anyway. So it's just part of the baked-in cost. So they've just purchased a new computer software that should enable the officers to process 8 loans a day. Great, we can process more. Although the overhead will increase because now we're paying for this software. So it's going to be another $50 a day for the software. So now we have to make an evaluation. Are we having better productivity with having this software, or is it not worth the price that we're paying to get that increased productivity? And so in this analysis, we'll look at labor and a multi-factor productivity before we just make that decision. So this is something we would look at. So we're going to decide which productivity equations we've got the information for, make sure that we know what the value of the outputs and inputs are, and make sure that we're talking about the same time period. Now, most of this information was given to us per day, so it makes sense for us to look at it per day. We could change it to weeks, months, years. That's fine, but we don't need to do that for this problem. So we really have 4 components, 4 equations we need to build, because remember, we're comparing what was the old productivity to what is the new productivity. And this is reflecting this decision of, are we going to spend this money on the software? If we look at the old labor productivity, we have 3 officers, 5 loans a day. If it's 8 hours each times 3, that's 24 labor hours. So that's the input, right? And so we get 15 loans a day for 24 labor hours of input, or 0.625 loans per labor hour. Now, if we get the software, same number of officers, now we have 8 loans a day, so that changes our numerator to 24 loans per day. And if we look at that, that's basically we're getting 1 loan per labor hour. So we've seen that already increase. And so that result increase, we take the 1 loan per labor hour divided by the 0.625, and we get 1.6 increase, or an increase of 60%. Sounds pretty good. Is it really that good? Well, let's look at it from a different perspective. Let's look at it from a dollars and cents perspective. And this is where the multi-factor productivity equation comes in. We can look at the old one, and same thing, 15 loans a day, that doesn't change. The only thing that changes is what we put on the denominator. So it's $820 a day for all 3 of those officers, plus $500 a day the old way, because that was our overhead. We get 0.0113 loans per dollar. We do it the new way, 24 loans a day, because we're doing 8 loans per person per day. Same cost, except for our overhead goes up now, because the cost of the software is embedded now into the overhead number. And we get 0.0175 loans per dollar. Again, we divide the new divided by the old to get the increase or decrease. It could be a decrease. And just a hint, if it's greater than 1, it's an increase. If it's less than 1, it's a decrease. So if it's a decrease, it's not a good idea. So we get a 1.55 greater than 1. Yay, sounds good. Increase 55%. Okay, not quite as good as the 60% we saw in the labor productivity, but this gives us a little bit better view from a cost standpoint of what we're going to see in dollars and cents. Now, that's not all there is about productivity. We also have to look at, how do we interpret this? It's like, okay, that sounds great, but maybe we're not measuring a decision of implementing a new technology, which is the last case. Maybe instead we just want to measure it over time. Are we increasing? Are we decreasing? Are we getting more efficient? Are we getting less efficient in our operations? I don't know. Got to figure that out. So always remember, to do productivity right, it just doesn't stand alone that you calculate it once. You actually have to compare it to something else. So a very common thing to do is look at year-over-year productivity. So you may look at September 1st, 2025, and compare it to September 1st, 2024, where you've looked at the productivity over a month or however long, whatever that period is. So you got to compare it to something else so that you can look and see, because really it's a ratio. You're looking to see, did it go up? Did it go down? How do we know? That's where the comparison has to come in. The actual raw calculations themselves doesn't tell us a whole lot of story unless we understand in context of how it's working. Also, we could have an increase in productivity, even year over year. Great, sounds wonderful. However, it could be that you're overworking your employees, and that could be a problem. If you haven't made any major structural differences, that could sound great on paper, but you could be burning out people and starting to lose people. So you got to be careful with that. Just productivity for productivity's sake is not necessarily a great thing. So there's other questions we have to ask. Is a partial productivity measurement enough to make an investment decision? Probably not. You probably need a couple of other things. Look at some ROIs, do some financial calculations as well. Is the total cost productivity measure a better reflection of productivity versus partial productivity? Probably in general, yes, because we're actually looking at multiple factors. But we don't always have all the information for total cost. Sometimes we can only do a partial because that's all that we have information on. Should you also look at productivity measures for other competitors to get a comparison. If the data is available and you can find it, great. Then you have some sense of, how much money they're spending per widget, or maybe how much cost they have per acquisition of somebody, or they can look at cost per tenant in a hotel, per night. So there's all sorts of things that you could do a comparison. I wouldn't focus always on that, particularly if you're trying to get off the ground, you're trying to get yourselves off the ground and measuring to yourself. But at some point you want to see, how do we compare in the marketplace? So again, it provides information on how you're doing relative to what's critical to the firm, but it's not a perfect measure. But it's a good starting point to give you a sense of, are we going in the right direction? Are we increasing productivity? Are we not increasing productivity? And is that a good thing or not? You have to look at your structures. Are you actually still supporting all the people that you have there and whatnot? So that's it for today. Stay tuned for the next lecture. Thanks so much.